Hey Greg, my name is Ryan, co-founder of Paddle Creek Games and project director of Fractured Veil.
So, Ryan, for people who are unfamiliar with this game, talk about what Fractured Veil is all about. People who it's a very Rust open world survival like game.
Basically, this is a survival game that me and my partners kind of have always wanted to make and always wanted to play. You know, we're big survival gamers. Love Rust, love 7 Days to Die. Played probably 50 or 60 survival games at this point, and always kind of walked away from them feeling a little unsatisfied. So we sat down, and what we were aiming for was blending survival games and MMOs, aspects of the two genres together in a kind of a new and interesting way. So Fractured Veil kind of takes that massive wide open world aspect of survival games and then drops in very deep player progression, but also kind of taking a little bit of inspiration from other MMOs. It's dropping in progression not just for you as the player, but for things like base building and progressing on that side of things, for working on settlements and kind of larger projects that are bigger than yourself or bigger than your clan. And then going to like a multi-server travel system like you might see in something like Final Fantasy Online. So we're taking a lot of inspiration from the amazing survival games on the market, Rust, 7 Days to Die, a little bit of Ark, a little bit of Conan, going into smaller survival games like Cryofall, and then taking a lot of inspiration from games like New World, Final Fantasy, a little bit of World of Warcraft, and some other MMOs.
Can you go a bit more in detail about how you're differentiating your game from other survival games out there like Rust or Stranded Deep, or even like you mentioned Ark and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I would say there's probably three main areas. One would be scale, one would be kind of the progression, and then one would be the world. So in terms of the world, this is the first time that we're seeing a survival game like this being set in Maui and bringing in the Hawaiian and the Maui culture into the genre. So thematically, you can think of perhaps like, I don't know if you remember the trailer for Dead Island 2, or Borderlands is another good example of kind of apocalypse in the background, about paradise in the foreground kind of deal. So it's that tongue-in-cheek of the whole world's burning around you, but no one's really taking it that seriously. So we're having a lot of fun taking that theme and mixing it with the Hawaiian Polynesian style. So a lot of like the corny tourist aspects of Hawaii mixed with some of the amazing authentic aspects of Hawaiian culture. So that would be one area to differentiate. The other is kind of the deep player progression that we're shooting for. And that's, again, bringing in those aspects of MMO games into the survival area that I think is one of the reasons why, we've walked away feeling a little bit unsatisfied. And then the other is the scale. So we're looking at 500 concurrent players per server. That's our immediate goal. Currently in our stress tests, we hit somewhere between 250 and 300. And then multi-server travel would be another big one. So we're looking at not only allowing the players to explore the island of Maui, but an interconnected web of islands of Maui that each represent like a parallel world. Because part of our story is there was an event called the Fracture, and it fractured our reality into thousands of parallel realities. And instead of just having a lobby, those parallel universes kind of represent the different game servers on the back end. So instead of having just a lobby system that you choose your server, what we wanted to do is something a little bit more organic, a little bit more diegetic, where you would be traveling through kind of a metaverse of servers that would represent different biomes or different variations of gameplay, like a longer night cycle, a longer day cycle, more NPCs, less NPCs, stuff like that, to allow the players to kind of explore this grander meta world and find other servers and other ways to play that might, captivate them or be more exciting for them.
So how does that work from a player viewpoint? So you said obviously the worlds are server based. Do you hop servers? If you do hop servers, does your gear come with you? Do your structures come with you? Like, how does that work in your game particularly?
Yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting challenges to face when you start introducing a mechanic like that. Like, how do you prevent a 300-man clan from just like going through servers like Locust and then locking the players out and then wiping the servers, then moving on with all of this stuff and just kind of becoming a Tamagotchi ball, just rolling through and destroying everything in their path. So we're doing a couple things kind of out of the gates to prevent that and to make it a little bit more fair for people that are, we would say, locals or natives on that server, and then people coming in from outside. So one of it is our energy system. So there's a rare resource in our world called 127, and that's the element that's used to kind of increase your reserves of energy. And once you've reached a certain amount, you kind of can power up one of these gates to take you into one of the connected servers that's connected to the server that you're on. And the amount of stuff that you want to take with you is going to exponentially increase the amount of energy required to get through this gate. So the average player probably is going to be taking maybe what's in their quick bar, if that, whereas you might need like a large clan to be able to transport, say, a vehicle through or whatever else. So just right off the bat, limiting or increasing the amount of work required to get stuff through. And the other thing that we've been talking to a few of the large clans that we have in the game and we're taking feedback from is some sort of immigration system as well. So having it so that if you want to kind of permanently move to different servers, you can go through as a tourist, and that's fine. And you'll have a little bit of a limited experience with kind of how big of a base you can build and where you can go as freely. But then as you kind of earn cred on the new server, then over time, you'll be allowed to kind of build a larger base and whatnot. So it's kind of like a graduated system to go from server to server. So I think that kind of solves some of the problems that we were looking at facing and hopefully answers your question.
So it's kind of like a power gating mechanic, basically, this energy source. So like when you do transfer, you got to be careful how you spend it, and you can't just, if you roll, you might roll into something else and lose all the stuff you just paid to transfer, and it could be punishing.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be re-rolling your character. Like you get to keep all of your blueprints and everything like that, but you wouldn't be able to take and move your whole base and all of your resources and whatnot. And if you think of like Valheim, for example, when you have your teleporters in Valheim going from biome to biome, there's just certain stuff that can't go through those things. So it'll probably be a combination of that as well, just to make sure that we can't have like the economic balance of that server just turned upside down by an influx of people flooding the market with stuff from another server.
No, I always find it interesting, the survival genre. Like, a lot of genres come in or game types, and they kind of play out, in their genre for whatever, a year or two, whatever. Then interest teeters off, and this next best thing. I remember when Rust came out, that was huge, and with Rust spawned, Stranded Deep, Ark, like all these other crazy similar types of games. But I think with survival games in particular, Valheim sparked a resurgence in that genre, showing that people really do enjoy these types of games. Can you talk about, from your perspective, what it was like seeing that popularity teeter in and out and then come rapidly back with Valheim, which eventually led to your game being made, which was probably made before Valheim? But
yeah. So we started work on Fractured Veil over 5 years ago, and we've been working on it in kind of stealth mode for 3.5 years. Partly because of what you were saying, in the sense of there was a gold rush. Obviously, there was a great video series by Soviet Womble. Anyways, there's a YouTube channel. They do a video essay on the DayZ mod and how the DayZ mod kind of failed to capture and kind of capitalize on what the community really was asking for, and that spawned Rust and 7 Days to Die and all of these other games. And so I think when people saw that success that Rust and 7 Days to Die and Ark had, there was a massive gold rush into the genre. And I think that kind of is in part what you're talking about, of like, it was just this explosion of, indie survival games, people that, weren't first to market, but were kind of throwing a really rough product out there that might have been successful if they were first to market. But at this point, players' expectations were higher than what they were. And we kind of saw that peter out. However, the interesting thing is we've done a lot of market research, is like Rust, for example, has more concurrent players today than they had a couple of months after their launch. So Rust is like a really good example, and I think is a game that really gets overshadowed by their toxic community of just how to do a survival game really, really well from a lot of standpoints, but from a business and success standpoint, because while most survival games, including Valheim, have these huge spikes and then these huge drops and then kind of a flat line or a slow decline into the end, Rust kind of had that and had the drop and then a slow incline up until where they are today, where they have, like I said, more concurrent players than they did before. And so when Valheim came out, I think what that did is it really woke a lot of people up that this market, the survival game market, isn't kind of saturated to the point that nobody can stomach another survival game. And when it came out, my first thoughts were like, oh, those poor developers. I mean, at one hand, they're getting rich and they're successful beyond their belief, but now it's like, I think it was 5 guys or 4 guys or something like that. And now they have like all of these expectations and this huge community to satisfy. And I'm like, oh, these guys aren't going to be sleeping for like the next 6 months. So, I mean, super happy for their success. And then also definitely feeling a lot of the stress they must have been going through is like this massive amount of responsibility. And the dreams and hopes of 5 million people are now resting on their shoulders.
Can you talk about some of the challenges when you're designing a survival game in particular? It's like something comes to mind is like the UI, right? Like the thing about
right.
I never got into it just because the UI is incredibly intimidating. There's submenus and submenus and submenus. So you can talk about some of those challenges like that. If UI is one of them, elaborate on that a little bit.
Oh, like really, really great question. Great timing to that question too, as we are just coming to the tail end of our UI UX redesign. So one of the big challenges over the past 5 years is that as we're designing all of these systems and we're tweaking and then we're getting clans in and solo players in, a lot of things change. So one of the biggest challenges and kind of difficulties is holding off on doing the nice pretty stuff until you can kind of lock in your feature set and whatnot. So for 3.5, 4 years, we just had like really blocky, really simple UI so that we can just move things around, resize things, not have to worry about redesigning a button because everything is just really simple. And the challenge is kind of getting to the end of that and saying, okay, we're locking these feature sets in. Now let's design a pretty UI. And so that's kind of the first big challenge. The second big challenge is that in survival games, you're just, as a player, you're managing a ton of information. So inventory management, resource management, crafting and building and researching and blah, 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 right? Like it's like an MMO in that regard. And what is the most intuitive, but also easy to swallow way to get that information to the player? It's a huge challenge because like you just mentioned, you log into a game like Rust, or if like the biggest example is like EVE Online. Like you log into a game like that, and I don't even want to imagine what percentage of players just like close the game out of anxiety as soon as it opens because they know they're never going to be able to figure this out. And so for us, what our challenge was kind of looking outside of video games for a lot of inspiration about how do you manage complex levels of information in an intuitive and digestible way. Because we knew that if we just reiterated and kind of made a different version of Rust or a different version of Arc, people would have the same experience that you just described. And we actually found a lot of great inspiration in product management, project management, and productivity tools, because we started looking at like what other applications out there are managing these levels of information. So we started looking at like Jira, Target Process, Trello, all of these project management and productivity tools. And we started bringing in kind of shortcuts and ways that they allow people to sift through things and filter through things really efficiently. And I think we've ended up with probably one of the most user-friendly, but also kind of densely packed with feature UI sets that I've ever seen in a survival game.
As a follow-up to that, do you ever get worried for maybe you took too long in development, or maybe you're releasing at the wrong time? I mean this from I'm asking you as a question. I'm not insinuating that you are. So we're clear. But like a good example is like Rend was a game that had a lot of these things that you're talking to me about, and the whole studio just went belly up, and I'm not even sure why. They were in a technical alpha, then they were in a Family Friends beta, and then they kind of just fell off the map. What is your studio doing to prevent something like that from happening to your game?
Yeah, so I love the example. Rend is we have pages and pages of research in Rend. Because of those like just a bunch of ex-Blizzard guys with a huge amount of experience with UX and World of Warcraft came in and I think designed one of the best at its time, one of the best user experiences in a survival game. There was obviously, other challenges. Their AI was a little bit crap in some situations, particularly when it comes to base building and all of this. But in terms of the studio collapse, like I know people that were inside that studio, and I know a lot of people will mention politics and upper management in terms of the collapse of that studio, as opposed to necessarily purely the game itself. But in terms of your other question, I mean, yeah, that anxiety fills me on a regular basis. What we're doing, the approach that we're taking is more kind of coming from a place of, as a gamer, I've seen these products go to Kickstarter or early access, and I've seen them promise the world, have great renders and big promises, and then underdeliver and implode. So as a gamer going through that experience with these games that I really got hyped for, I came to the table and I'm like, before we make any of those promises, before we start producing any of these renders, I want to know that we can actually produce the hard stuff first. I want to do the heavy lifting ourselves. And coming back to like Valheim, so here we are, we're like spending years and years and years developing a decoupled backend from the engine that can scale to hundreds and hundreds of players, that can have inter-server travel and all of this stuff. And we have, you know, like a mediocre looking front end product because so much work is going into the underlying tech. And then within like, I don't know how long they were developing the game for, probably a couple of years, they released like a game that is a super simple version of what we're planning in terms of the multiplayer, the persistent side of things, and a really like a front end and a user experience on the surface that really grabs you. And they go and they just like blow everybody out of the water. And I'm thinking, man, should we have just done like a really simple MVP of our game first? That's like a single player experience instead of doing all of this, instead of worrying so much about what people are going to think and trying to inspire confidence by showing them the work that's been done in the technical side of things. So that definitely caused like that anxiety of like, are we spending the time in the wrong place? But, you know, in my heart, what I want to do again is I want to make sure through and through that we can actually pull off what we're saying we can pull off before we go to market and start asking anybody for pledges or early access purchases.
Do you think, what's one of the greatest challenges for you to try to get people, like say someone has, you know, $4,000 in Rust or $6,000 in Arc, and is it challenging getting them off those games to say, hey, this is something similar in the genre you like, you just have to get off Rust, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, so getting off Rust, that's hard because that team is just like, they're just crushing it and firing on all cylinders. Like every week, it's like a whole new set of features that are just blowing every other survival game out of the water. So I mean, that's if you're hooked on Rust, that's a hard sell. Just on the feature set. But in terms of the theme, in terms of the PvE and the PvP mixture that we have going, in terms of like Diablo inspired dungeons, in terms of like all of the stuff that Rust is never going to do because that's just not the type of game that they want to do, or Unity just is never going to be able to pull that off. Yeah, we get a lot of people coming to us with that exact statement of, I've got 4,000 hours in Rust, I'm really keen on this, and here's why. Because I think at the end of the day, when you have 4,000 hours in anything, I don't know, most players that I talk to, they're ready for something new at that point.
You know, you mentioned early access and stuff like that. Like, how do the things like that help improve the game's development? Not only early access, but you know, social media and things like Discord to have people play test your game. And I guess is it an alpha right now, or is it technical alpha right now? In a technical alpha to make it improve it more on, especially when you have such a personal connection to these like people, like a personal contact tool like Discord, where they can literally talk to you, strangers.
Oh yeah, and they do.
Yeah,
and they do. Yeah, so this is first and foremost a community-driven project, and it has been for ever since we opened the door. So we're in a closed alpha state, and we have been in a closed alpha state since last April or so, and it's maybe a little bit before that, but it's, you know, we were working in kind of a vacuum, wanting to do the heavy lifting first, as I mentioned, and then as soon as I was like, oh, okay, we can pull this off, then we started opening the doors and we started letting in people in, a couple dozen at a time, a couple hundred here or there, developing relations with large clans and getting them in and getting their feedback. And it became very apparent very quickly to me that the collective sum of 1,000 ideas is always going to trump the sum of 2 or 3 even genius level ideas, which, you know, we're not genius people. We're good, great game developers, and we're passionate about what we do. But no matter how good we are, those 1,000 voices are always going to end up coming up with a better idea than we can think of. And we just started tapping into that really hard. And it became the most rewarding aspect of developing this game. Absolutely, no doubt. And it's changed the way that we kind of approach things and how we prioritize things. A really good example of that is about a year and a half ago or so, we put out a poll. And what I wanted to do, maybe it was 2 years ago, what I wanted to do is I wanted to see, you know, with the game being where it is at that time, you know, what is the one area that people would vote on to say, you should focus on this more than anything else. And so we did, the 5 pillars of survival games. It was crafting, it was building, it was PvP or just combat in general, PvE, PvP. It was exploration, going out and finding new locations, and it was social. So, interacting with other people, trading, whatever. And I expected it to be, base building, probably number 1, crafting, combat number 2, but pretty close to each other. And then the other 2 kind of tailing off. And it was like 5-1 for base building, and then crafting was under that, and then it wasn't even close. And so we just stopped everything we were doing and then focused on nothing but our base building system for about 11 months. And we built out the most beautiful kind of Lego set that we could think of, concepted everything from scratch, and then we went through 35 survival games and we just started researching, what are they doing well with base building, what are they doing wrong, and then we started looking outside of survival games to produce the system that we have right now, because it was a total shock to us, and it really showed why we can't work in that vacuum, we can't work in that bubble, because even though we think we have our fingers on the pulse of things, you kind of poll 1,000 people and they'll tell you exactly what the average survivor gamer wants that's interested in our product. So I think it's allowed us to make a much better product, and it's also just been the most fulfilling aspect of my day, of just waking up, checking Facebook. We have a Facebook community now that's at about 1,000 members. Our Discord is almost at, I think, 4,000 members or so. And this is small potatoes when you think of the larger games, but it's great because it's still at the size that I can just spend 20 minutes in the morning responding to everything, every comment. I can go to the Facebook ads and I get the feedback because it's so quick, and so there's no barrier to entry for somebody just to yell at me about everything that's wrong about our game from what they see in the ads or in a post. And so it's been a really great opportunity for me to also kind of look at some of those criticisms and be like, our messaging needs to be better, or maybe we should change this design a little bit, and kind of walking that balance between not having 1,000 cooks in the kitchen, but still being able to let the good ideas rise to the top and pay attention to them.
Speaking of that, you're self-published. What are some of the pros and cons to being self-published? I know, for example, you don't have to have set milestone release times like you do when you actually have a publisher. But then again, you can be stuck in early access for several years in that case.
Yeah. So what you just described is a pro and a con, in the sense of a publisher. So we've worked with a few publishers in the past on kind of other projects with some of our past work, and there's some good and there's some bad. I think more publishers these days are probably more good than bad, as they just realize that supporting devs and having a good relationship is a long-term strategy that pays off for everybody. So I think at the end of the day, the pros of working with the publishers, those guys, they're going to focus you hard on kind of what's going to be the biggest bang for your buck. They're going to make sure you're delivering on what you need to be delivering instead of kind of wandering around things. But at the same time, you also need the freedom to kind of do some of the things that I described. If our community tells us at a ratio of 5-1 that they want X and we don't have X, we need to stop what we're working on and start working on X. If it's crazy skewed in kind of that direction. And I don't know if a publisher would just say okay, yeah, we'll throw away your milestone schedule and let's add in the best construction system anyone's ever seen. So I think for us and our path, we needed to do it this way. But I think for a lot of people, particularly those people that might not be experienced in game dev, we come from kind of a pretty long background in game development. I've been in the industry for 21 years, and our producer was a producer on Fortnite and Rage and Doom. And so our engineers as well. So for us, kind of, we know what to focus on and we know how to focus. But I think for an indie team, it's not just the money and the funding, but it's making sure that their time is being effectively spent. And that's where a publisher really kind of focuses you.
Yeah, I mean, I love when people use Fortnite as an example, because that's indicative, I think, of all entertainment, whether you're in games, movies, television, whatever, art. It's nobody cared about that game until all of a sudden they did.
Yeah,
We covered that game for years and no one gave a shit, and then all of a sudden it's the biggest thing in the world. It's so weird how that works.
Yeah, I mean, how much do you attribute to that, to the whole PUBG Battle Royale Fortnite debacle?
I mean, I don't know. It's timing. right?
Right.
Timing, right place, right time. I mean, they were in early access for years after they went popular. Before that, like it was a co-op game where it was a tower defense game.
And I think they saw the wins with PUBG and they're like, that's what people want. And we have this whole thing. We have like 90% of that experience in our co-op game. All we got to do is spend, what was it, like 6 months or 9 months, like retuning the whole thing to bring in the battle royale aspect of it. So I think it was obviously a brilliant move on their part, as that game now, like you saw in the lawsuit, that game represents like 85% of their revenue or something like that.
Oh, it's huge, and like it's so easy to just throw in skins and get third-party licensing,
right?
That stuff at this point, but that's beyond. And they do.
I mean, it's easy for us to say, but I mean, they're the ones actually pulling it off. I like, as someone that's been running companies for 22 years, I have no idea how you scale like they scale, but they're doing it well, and they're making good money and good on them at the end of the day. And the rest of us get to benefit from the technological advancements that product funds, right? Because we're on the Unreal Engine as well. And, you know, we kind of joke that people using the engine are going to benefit just as much from Fortnite as kind of Fortnite does. But it's true, like we have a lot of similarities. You know, it's a first-person shooter, it's big open world, so they're always optimizing to make their Fortnite experience better for their players, and then kind of for free, after a couple of months, they pass those performance optimizations or whatever else down to the rest of us to enjoy. So it's a pretty cool relationship in that regard.
Going back to Fractured Veil, we could talk about Fortnite, but going back to, so what's your plan for this game when it's out? Are you plan to release like at a set price point on Steam in early access? Are you planning to do like a Kickstarter to show interest to a publisher? Like what's the end goal here as you ramp up to get it closer and closer to being released?
Sure, yeah. So our goal is Kickstarter in early September. I think we're aiming for September the 7th right now. So kind of the messaging and my approach to that is like, we've done a lot of the heavy lifting on the big risky stuff, like the tech, the back end optimization, the core loop, all of the things that I've been talking to you today about. Now what we want to do is we want to take this product to the community and let them help fund the content that's going to go in and fill the world. So custom weapons, custom monsters, custom construction sets, all of that stuff. And then once it's there, then we'll see how the campaign does, and then we'll go to an early access and do that, and let the community keep on driving the development process of this. And I mean, it'll be a challenge when we go from 4,000 people to 400,000 people in our Discord server, but I think Kickstarter and early access are two great platforms to allow us to have like a progressive launch, because the nature of a game like this is if we went to early access tomorrow and just let in 5 million people like Valheim. With Valheim, everyone's hosting their own servers and it's great and you can scale like that. But for us, because we are blending the MMO and survival elements in, we have to scale up the infrastructure to handle that. So Kickstarter is an ideal first step for us because, you know, we'll be looking at 5,000, 10,000, 15 people, and we can handle that kind of scale. And then we work out the kinks in terms of scalability and some of the back end stuff that might come with that. And then we go with all of the beautiful custom content that the Kickstarter helped fund. Then we go to an early access and we scale it to the next level, as opposed to just like going straight for Guster right off the bat, having everything kind of implode like a dying star under the weight of all of these people, right, and then facing the repercussions from the community of that.
And then so where can people go to find more information about your game and how can they support it?
Yeah, rock and roll. So fracturedveil.com, that would be the first place to go. You can get all of the links that you want there on the left-hand side. There's a nice little pop-up at the bottom with a link to the Kickstarter. Discord.gg/fracturedveil, of course. That's where we love people to come in. We've got a great, vibrant community, as well as on Facebook. So facebook.com/groups/fracturedveil. And yeah, there's everything that you need in all of those spots. And we're also, of course, if you want to Google us, on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere else.